Special guest in conversation this week. I've so looked forward to meeting him, so I was absolutely delighted when we picked up the Sunday Times and he actually gets a full front page on the news review. On Sunday, I was so thrilled because we now end the affair with Cicero. Robert Harris, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Steve.
You must be mortified that after 12 years it's finished.
It's a combination of mortification and relief.
You've lived with it for such a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, I wrote a novel called Pompeii, which came out in 2003, and just as that was published, I decided I'd like to write something else set in Rome. I just had enjoyed it so much, and so I'd been a political journalist, always wanted to write a big novel about politics, and I thought, well, why don't I actually set it in ancient Rome rather than trying to invent an MP and a junior minister?
Exactly. Just take real people.
Well, you can't improve on reality. I mean,
No.
that's it. Generally speaking, especially in politics, the people who actually get there are more bizarre than anything you could invent.
It is true. Actually, a friend of mine was saying when you were talking about Pompeii, and he said I actually read the book when I was in Pompeii. He said that's the best way to do it. And I said, well, you could tell from that you quite clearly had a thing about Rome and about the Romans and about the way they operated. Would you like to have lived then?
Well, without anaesthetic. No,
Not too sure without the anaesthetic.
I mean, I wouldn't have minded dipping in and out, but
Yes.
I don't think I would have liked to have been there permanently. I mean, life expectancy was only about 25 or 26.
Was it really?
Yeah, so I'd be nearly at the end.
You and I together?
We both would, yes. And I think it was very violent, tough. But what a period, how fascinating it is, and what a mirror to our own times it continues to be.
Yes. And how much of it is still around. I mean, I've been to Rome on a couple of occasions. I find it absolutely fascinating that things, that you just can't believe that things survive, to be honest with you.
No, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Formia, where Cicero had his seaside villa, which features quite a lot in the book.
Yeah.
And in this lady's garden, she has a kind of 60-metre length of wall. It must be sort of 12, 15 feet high with all the arches in it. And it is the garden, Cicero's garden wall, looking out to sea. It's absolutely phenomenal to see this. And of course, it being in Italy, they take no care or notice of it at all. It's up against a tennis court and a swimming pool.
Isn't that strange? I mean, when I went round there as well, I mean, I'm looking at all these things, and they had a programme on the television a short while ago where somebody went to Rome and they went underneath I think it was underneath the Colosseum or something like that, where all these tunnels are, and you think to yourself, it really exists.
Yes.
It's really here. The Colosseum was that theatre of blood that they described.
Yes, they had. I mean, underneath the Colosseum are all the cages where they kept the animals and the jails where they kept the gladiators. So, the whole thing, it was just like a big modern theatre.
Yes, except you sort of went there on your lunchtimes. It was obviously just a continuous show of people being killed.
Yes. I mean, there's so much that's similar about the Romans, which is why I wanted to write the books. But there's no doubt there's so much that is different. And the things that is most different, I think, is the cruelty. I mean, the absolute sort of shrug your shoulders and try and devise the most horrendous means of killing somebody.
Yes. Well, I believe that they actually got through more animals than anybody else. That the more exotic the animal was, the more they were fascinated. They would set fire to people. And yet at the same time, they could flood the arena and turn it into sort of some tableau with floating ships, and you think to yourself, but this was so ahead of its time, and yet so cruel, and yet we see it being mirrored in Syria at the moment.
Yes, that's right. This novel ends with great violence and beheading and destruction, and just when you think that, when I started the book, as you said 12 years ago, one thinks this is gone from the world, and yet now one finds images all over the internet.
Yes.
and pictures in the newspapers of people being beheaded in the very region where some of the book takes place, and the Roman era temples being destroyed by ISIS. You have this terrible sense, which I think is the other appeal of the Romans, that it can all go wrong. That the civilization, you look around, you think it's permanent, but actually it can suddenly vanish.
I didn't realise that was beheading a popular method of execution for the Romans.
Yes. Well, they would probably be considered fairly tame. But yes, was the Tarpeian Rock in Rome, a high kind of cliff that people used to be thrown off. That was one way that they did it. In the Casa, the prison off the Forum. You can still see the traces of that. Garrotting was quite, when a Roman general had triumphed and paraded through Rome, he brought with him all his prisoners, who may have been in custody for 2, 3, 4 years. Like when Caesar came back from Gaul, Vercingetorix, the leader of the Gauls, who'd been his prisoner for 5 years, was then led to the carcer and garroted. The idea was that the prisoner should die and cease to see the light on the same day that his conqueror received all the acclamation and glory from the people of Rome. And sometimes the conqueror would pardon the prisoners and they would be allowed to go free. It was the luck of the draw, really. But a society based on a kind of constant theatre ritual of violence.
Yes. And yet, at the same time, they were sort of... They had armies of people. They seemed to have no shortage of people who wanted to join the army. Or was that the only thing available to them?
Well, the pay could be quite good,
right.
and the Dictator is set just when really Rome becomes the plaything of generals with huge standing armies. Up to that point, the armies tend to be formed to deal with particular emergencies, and then they would disperse. But by the time we get to this era, there are huge standing armies in Gaul and in the Middle East, and in the end, it's this huge amount of armed force, hundreds of thousands of men, that the republican system, the democratic system, can no longer control. And a general who has 3 or 4 legions is suddenly in a very powerful position, and they really just carve up Italy between them.
Amazing, really. And so, your research must be quite meticulous, mustn't it? Do you how much research do you do for each one? If we spread these over 12 years.
Yes.
And there's a decent gap between 1, 2 and 3, and it finishes with 3, ladies and gentlemen, so there isn't another one after this. Although there's no saying there might not be something else to do with the Romans after this, because you're obviously so interested in it. But the research must be the complicated bit, to try and find everything and put it all into context. It's easier for people like us to pick you up and go, well, of course this couldn't have happened because of...
Well, yes, you've got to be careful, because there are a lot of people who know a lot. So, when I started... In 2003, when I was a much younger man, I decided that the book, the story I wanted to tell was the end of the Roman Republic, the last 25 years of the Roman Republic, with these incredible characters, Cicero, Caesar, Cato, Pompey, Claudius, every one of whom ended dying violently in this struggle for power that went on for decades. And I envisaged it as a kind of political procedural, West Wing on the Tiber, if you like. And because it was 3 volumes, it meant that I had to know really what happened in volume 3 when I started volume 1. So I had to do, for 2 years, literally, I did nothing but research. And by the time I'd finished, I had 750,000 words of research. And that's been my quarry that I've gone back to, first for Imperium 2006. Then I had the idea for The Ghost, the novel about an ex-prime minister. So it was a gap. And then 2009, Lustrum, the second volume of the trilogy, appeared. And now, I've gone back and finished the whole thing. And so each time I've gone back to this kind of well, if you like, of fact. And, Cicero and I have grown old together as the work has gone on.
Except he was... older than you when he died?
Yes, he was
62?
63. Yes, I'm 58, but I was 46 when I started the whole thing. And, as you get older, you do change. And his children grew up, mine grew up. He got divorced. Thankfully, I haven't got divorced. No. But you have that sense of those years passing, and in that sense, I think the book has benefited by being delayed. I think I've matured a bit as the time has gone on.
I think a fair bit, because your life itself has been a very mature life. You were a journalist for the BBC. You worked Newsnight, Panorama, but your love of books goes back quite a bit before that, doesn't it? The love of reading and printing and things like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was definitely sort of born into it in a way, in that my father was a printer, and my earliest memories, he used to work on a Saturday morning in Nottingham, were going, and these huge German Heidelberg presses he used to work on, and he'd sit me next to the machine, no doubt breaking every health and safety rule that now exists, and he'd give me paper, to draw, an unlimited supply of paper and the smell of the ink, and somehow, that became embedded in me, and right from an early age, certainly about the age of 8 or 9, I knew I wanted to be a writer.
And so at school, were you particularly prolific at writing? Was English your favourite subject?
English and history were my favourite subjects, and what I used to do was make imaginary newspapers, actually. Newspapers which were full of untrue stories. Can you imagine
Good
that?
heavens above. I can't believe that.
So that was, in a funny way, when I look back, I was always interested in using the imagination, but from fact. So fake newspapers, fake plans of cities and countries. That was the sort of thing that I used to do. And then graduated from that to writing plays, which I put on with my friends. And then a career in journalism, because I wanted to work with words and learn, and come to London. I wanted to get away from the provinces, and so I came to work for the BBC.
Were you an only child?
No, I have a sister, a little bit younger than I am.
That's always, because when you were talking about that, I was thinking this sounded to me like an only child who was so dedicated to it. There were no interferences in your life.
Well, I think I had some of the attitude of an only child, in that I was always very happy to just take myself off and live in my own head.
Right.
I've gone on doing that ever since. It's funny, I was thinking the other day that when my parents went to parents' evening at school when I was 6, all the other children had done sort of what me and my hamster, or what I did on my holidays. And I had written an essay entitled "Why Me and My Dad Don't Like Sir Alec Douglas-Home." And this was, I've gone on writing that same piece with variations ever since. So it was an odd interest, this dual interest in writing and in politics. And anyway, it's been a life.
It certainly has. Very interesting life. Listen, very quick break. More from Robert after this. Special guest in conversation, the final part of the trilogy, Dictator, by Robert Harris. It finishes now. When we were talking about Cicero's death, and he was beheaded. He's comes in. I think Caesar has got an army there, hasn't he? There's a couple of thousand people, and he gets beheaded. When you talk about the trilogy, did you know when you started that it was going to be 3, or did you think, maybe we can squeeze 2 out, or maybe we can get 4 out?
Well, in an ideal world, I would have done the book as just 1.
Yeah.
But there was so much material, and it was just not really feasible. I mean, if and when the books are eventually put together, it'll be 1,300 pages. So it seemed to me that it was logical to cut it up. And it really fell into 3 acts in a way. Volume 1, Imperium, which is about the rise to power. Volume 2, Lustrum, is the 5 years when he was in power and facing the consequences of power. And Volume 3, the one that's just finished, Dictator, is really the repercussions of his career and the way it played out. And, they are the most tumultuous years in human history, probably, until we get to the years leading up to the Second World War. It was so huge, the world was turned upside down. And Cicero bobs around in this world like a cork, really, swept along in a stream, until eventually, at the very end, he does come back into power. So it was always a difficult book to write, this one, and I think that I slightly, maybe subconsciously, kept putting it off. So it's been a while. It's been 6 years since Volume 2.
Yes.
But what worried me about writing the book was that Cicero, forced out of office by Caesar, turned to philosophy, and I thought, well, this is going to be interesting, trying to write a political novel, a kind of lively thriller about a man who sits at home writing philosophy. But oddly enough, philosophy turned out to be the key to the book, because Cicero used philosophy to reconcile himself to his fear of death, just as everyone was having to, because there was so much bloodshed. That's what he set out to do, and it changed him, And I think all fiction writers or screenwriters, they want to see a character change from beginning to end of a work. Mostly people don't, it's a myth. But Cicero, I think, did change himself.
If we could bring him back, what would you want to know from him?
Well, that's a very good question. I'd quite like to know what he and Caesar had for dinner, actually, on the famous day that we invited. You mentioned it.
You said you wanted to lie on a chaise longue.
Yes,
just to
he
watch.
invited Caesar to. Caesar invited himself round to dinner, and so when he was dictator. And Cicero thought, oh, okay, why not? So he said there was any trouble. Caesar turned up with 2,000 men, all of whom also had to be fed and watered. And I would love to have been at that event, and I would love to have been an eavesdropper, and I would like to have talked to Cicero. I mean, I think he was so fascinating. He had so many levels of his personality. And because he left behind more than 800 letters, which miraculously survived in a library in Verona, a collection of them, which were discovered in the 14th century, really, he began the Renaissance. That was the beginning of the Renaissance, the discovery of his letters, which led on to an interest in the other writers of the period. So there's anything you could ask him, but he's one of the creators of the modern world.
Do we know where he's buried?
No, because he was murdered by his political enemies. His head and hands were taken back to Rome and nailed up in the Forum to warn anyone else not to oppose the new powers. His body was probably burnt on the beach where he'd been trying to make his escape. There's a great kind of stone tower at Formia in Italy, about 70 miles south of Rome, which is called the Mausoleum of Cicero, but it probably just marks the spot where he was killed.
Yeah.
So that's the nearest you can get to seeing an actual physical memorial to him. Formia is a beautiful place, incidentally.
Yeah.
I said, well, not many British visitors go there, but it's on the coast as you drive south from Rome to Naples. You can see Vesuvius from it.
They will now. Now you've opened this place up. They're all going to be horrified. We've kept it as a secret. So, where are all the Caesars buried? Did they have a special graveyard for these people?
Well, mainly, of course, in those days you were burnt on a pyre. Caesar was burnt in the Forum, and a kind of mausoleum temple was put there, and his ashes were interred there. So somewhere around there are his ashes, and other emperors. There's at Hadrian's tomb. There are others, emperors that followed. You can physically find them, but the Republic in Rome I'm writing about there's virtually no traces of it, because it was actually knocked down by Augustus and the emperors, and they built much more swanky new buildings. So. Unlike Pompeii, where I could go back to the Bay of Naples, very pleasant research trips they were too, to walk the old town. Here there wasn't much I could do, travelling around. It all had to be done from books, really.
Is there still a living in writing? You have to sell a lot of books nowadays.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I've been very fortunate. It's much tougher now. When they abandoned, if you remember, about 20 years ago, the net book agreement, which meant the books had to be sold at a fixed price, that led to an explosion in sales, and the rise of the supermarket celebrity memoir and so on, and the big selling books being sold at £5 or £6 for a hardcover in supermarkets. So it brought a lot of money into publishing, but it wiped out actually a whole mid-list of authors who could have made a reasonable living and sold a few thousand copies a year, and that's all gone. And people are either really self-publishing on the internet, or not getting very much money, or they're having to sell hundreds of thousands of copies, and the centre ground has gone.
Yes,
and that's a great shame. I think it was probably a mistake actually to have taken off that net book agreement.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember people talking about it even on the radio, sort of saying the supermarkets would sell at a loss.
Yes,
to get people in there, and you think, well, this is just ridiculous, because it knocked out a lot of the independent booksellers. We lost 3 in Twickenham, one after the other closed because they couldn't compete.
Yeah, I know. It's been tragic, really. That whole layer of culture is gone, and the ludicrous nature of it was illustrated by the J.K. Rowling phenomenon. The Harry Potter books, there was British publishing with the most extraordinary product that everybody wanted, and it was practically being given away. And some independent booksellers used to go into the Tesco's, buy it, take it back and sell it at the cover price.
Yes.
So you had the weird phenomenon that when they totted up sales figures, there were more being sold than had actually been printed, because they were being sold twice.
Yeah. Exactly. But you're right. I knew people who went in there and bought loads of them to resell.
Yeah.
Which was a ridiculous scenario. Of course, the other thing which helps authors now is if you manage to get serialisation, or if they manage to get made into a film. Is this too big to be made into a film?
Well, it's going to be made into a television series, I think.
Is it?
Yes. I haven't quite signed the contract, but it's virtually signed. So then we'll wait and see. But one thing I have learnt over the 25 years or whatever I've been writing novels is never to count any of these chickens, because you very rarely see them hatch. I can tell you that. So we'll wait and see. I think it would have to be done as a sort of revamped, updated Claudius kind of, box set kind of a.
Ooh, lovely.
Because it goes over 25 years when you put the 3 books together, and it has a cast of hundreds.
So a lot of CGI, I think.
A lot of CGI, exactly. Yes.
But it should be very interesting. It'd be lovely if it actually comes off and ends up as a box set.
It would be wonderful because, well, we live out in the country, and in the winter the box set is this sort of way that we get through.
He doesn't live that far out into the country. It's still within human habitation, I have to tell you. You live in a vicarage, do you?
We live in a vicarage on the banks of the Kennet and Avon Canal.
Lovely.
Yeah, and we've been there. I've written all my books there except for Fatherland, and had 4 children grow up there. So it's very much home. But the box set by the fire in the winter evenings is a staple of our lives.
I can quite believe it. It said I also grew up near the Kennet and Avon Canal. In fact, my father sunk his boat on it. Just after we gave it to the Sea Scouts, I think we wanted to get rid of the thing, and it promptly sunk on us. So we sort of gave.
Oh, that's the way Nero tried to kill his mother.
Well, exactly. That would be the good thing to do. I must ask you, because of your political connections, and we see the Tory party conference taking off in Manchester, and we see the most outrageous behaviour by people spitting at journalists and things the like of which I don't think I'd ever seen before.
Yes, well, it reminds me a bit of when I used to go in the 80s to party conferences. The passions are strong and violent, and we had a period of 20 years of pretty consensus, political consensus, and now that's broken down, and politics is a lot rougher. I think the scenes are shameful, because party conferences that's democracy, and you should be able to walk into it unintimidated.
Where do you think we will be politically in 5 years' time?
Well, there won't be a Labour government. I think we can be fairly certain about that. But there's a lot
because of Corbyn.
Yes, I'm sick. I've spent too many years listening to people saying, "Oh, well, you never know," and actually the whole Miliband experience, when I sort of knew that he was never going to be Prime Minister, but everyone kept solemnly saying, "Well, it could happen." Well, let's call a spade a spade. Corbyn is not going to be elected unless some revolution occurs. But these are very. They slightly remind me of the Roman Republic and the end of the Roman Republic. These are tumultuous times, and we could well pull out of Europe. That's much more likely now than it was just a few months ago. We could see the United Kingdom break up. We could be involved far more in peacekeeping operations and so on in the Middle East and in Africa. So I think a period of political calm, which we've enjoyed for 15, 20 years, is probably coming to an end.
I fear you could be right. Robert Harris, thank you very much.
Been a pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
So you did leave school at 15?
Well, I sort of left. They said to me, "Don't come back, and we won't make you." And
similar
I said,
kind of thing, isn't it?
Similar kind of thing. Yeah.
Were you naughty?
We parted company. I don't think I was so much naughty. I just wouldn't go. I used to spend all